It's week 7. I got the Doc and the Wild Man. We're here to break it all down. I'm keeping it peppy, Gene, because you got to tell us about Patrick Mahomes. Are we going to see him again this year? I'm going to do the whole show like this. And what you got?
Well, I'm not going to do the whole show like that. Good luck to you. Yeah, nothing but good news. I mean, it's all relative, right? He's still going to be out for at least a couple of weeks, but nothing but good news since Thursday night and what had happened then with the dislocated kneecap. The word from multiple sources, both national and local, is that there's some ligament issues there, but nothing so significant that surgery was discussed as even an option during the season. And Ian Rappaport is implying that it's possible that there may not be surgery after the season. I don't know. That's going to prove to be the case, but I think the goal here is going to be, or the question is going to be whether or not Mahomes can make it back before their bye week, and whether or not he'll travel to Mexico City or not. I think that's probably on the unlikely side. I suspect week 13 is going to be a little bit more likely than week 11. I don't see much reason to push it with the travel, with the early return, even with the reassuring MRI findings. So let's hope that those extra 2 weeks really get him as stable as possible so we don't see any recurrence before the end of the year. And, if we get him back at week 11, so much better. But I think 13 is going to be the key.
Okay, Matt. So this is just like rapid fire lightning round, okay? Because the overarching question is, do you hold Chiefs players waiting for Mahomes? Okay. So let's start with LaShawn McCoy.
Yeah, I think you do. I think that unless you find some hot waiver wire prospect, within the next couple of weeks, who's going to get more volume and has shown some ability to produce at a high rate, I can't think of anybody. So no.
And wouldn't it make sense for the offense to run more through McCoy now?
Oh, absolutely.
Mahomes is out. Like actually have a legitimate balanced offense.
It's very possible that could happen, but I think more than anything, what you're going to be seeing here is just maybe a downturn somewhere between 25 to 35%, on each of the players that we're going to be talking about across the board.
Okay, Demarcus Robinson, Byron Pringle.
I think that most likely this is going to be the least predictable of the Chiefs receivers in terms of what's going to happen here. So I would probably look at this as either one of those are probably the most droppable. Though it's going to be the most variable of the group, because there might be a player here that he has a rapport with that we're not sure of yet until we see him on the field.
Mecole Hardman.
I think Mecole Hardman is probably the most stable, because he was already the one that gets the lightest amount of workload. I think in terms of, he's used more to stretch the field or more as a yak type of player. So if you have him already, you already know what he is, and that's going to remain the same.
And the last one, and actually I got this question and it kind of inspired this little mini segment, Matt. And Gene, really quickly, what do we know, or do we know anything more about Sammy Watkins' condition?
I never really expected him to play on Thursday night. It was a little bit of surprise that there were early week reports that he was, that maybe suggested that the Chiefs were angling toward that Thursday night game rather than stressing him the week before. But I don't know that we're going to know that much. Andy Reid may tell us some things tomorrow, but again, multiple week absence at this point gives you pause that it's going to be certainly longer than that. So questionable for next week too.
With that in mind, and Matt, assume the person that's asking is asking about, we're not talking about Sammy Watkins or Alan Lazard. Someone, I can't remember who it was from my Twitter feed that called him the Lazard King, which I love that. The Lazard King. So we're not talking about just some end of the roster turn, but one of those leagues, Matt, like guillotine leagues, for instance, we only have 5 bench spots. Are you saving one of those for Sammy Watkins?
Probably not, because you're at this point of the season, if you're really trying to rely on, if you're at the point where you're trying to hold on to Sammy Watkins, it probably means that you're trying to get production. You need production pretty badly, I think, if you're if you feel like you need to hold on to him. And if you don't feel like you need to hold on to him, then it's probably going to be more of a luxury thing for you at this point. So, he's a guy that, he may come back and produce at a high level at some point. But he's someone that at this stage, you're going to have to let him go.
Okay, maybe you're having a little technical difficulties. Thank you, everybody in the chat room. I hope that I got that straightened out on my microphone. And let's get into all the Week 7 injuries now that we've gone over the earthquake that went through NFL and fantasy football on Thursday night, Gene. And let's actually start with the game tonight, because we had, if there was an important player for Dallas at wide receiver or on the offensive line or in the secondary, we didn't know on Friday what we were going to get Sunday night. We have an idea. How much do you trust the report that basically everybody questionable for Dallas is going to play tonight?
I think they want everybody to play tonight for sure. Really important game against Philadelphia. They've struggled, obviously, without that offensive line intact. And there's a good argument to be made that 80% of Amari Cooper and Lyle Collins and Tyron Smith and Zach Martin and even Randall Cobb and Byron Jones, Xavier Woods, what have you, all of those guys that have been dealing with injuries is better than whatever the backups have been. So, it seems like the team is leaning towards rolling the dice and hoping that these players don't sustain any aggravations of their injury as the evening goes along. So knowing that the Cowboys have been on the optimistic side, I think it's very possible that we hear that these guys, as the afternoon goes along or during pregame warmups, that one of them isn't able to play as effectively. And I would be surprised. I'm not trying to predict anything here, but just all of these injuries are significant enough that you wonder if all of them are going to make it through the game anyway, or are we going to see some rotation, or is Cooper only going to be used in high leverage situations, and how are the tackles going to hold up a little bit? But, Joe Looney is probably not going to play. Some of their backups have issues along the offensive line as well. So it's going to see. I think the big question, though, is Cooper. What are we going to do with Cooper? And if it were not Amari Cooper, and had we not seen him on the injury report playing through multiple nagging injuries throughout his career and generally play effectively, then I'd say I'd be really pessimistic about this. And I'm still not certain that he's going to be able to be effective, because he really wasn't able to do much on Friday. And you would think that after 2.5 weeks, it was a week 5 injury, that there wasn't a lot of interval improvement that went on towards the end of the week, but it was enough for Cooper to say on Friday, I feel better this week than I did last week, and suggest that he was going to make every effort to play, as he did last week, knowing from pregame warmups. He told people this week that he was jumping around during pregame warmups and could tell he had no explosion at all, tried to give it a couple of plays and then left to not return after just 3 plays. So I don't know that outcome is within the range of possibility this week. I think if he's active, he's likely to see enough snaps and targets to be useful. And then you hope that he has recovered enough so that another hit around that area doesn't send him off for multiple plays in series. So I think the consensus and the totality of the evidence suggests that he's going to play. And if Cooper's on the field, I think you take a shot with him, knowing that there is a floor expectation that's much lower than it normally would be.
Matt Carlos Benitez in the chat room has, I think, a relevant question to just start to sort this out: Gallup or Cooper? And I'll say my answer is Gallup. If I had both of these guys, I would probably play Gallup. And although I think Gene's right, because Cooper still offers you the upside of a 10 for 200 game in a Dallas-Philly game. If you really like, Matt, for instance, like Calvin Ridley against the Rams today, I feel like that might be a hard choice with Amari Cooper. I'm looking at the guys I have right next to Cooper in my rankings, Will Fuller, even somebody like Mike Williams because of Tennessee's corners, or Brandon Cooks in that game. What do you have a Cooper decision? Do you agree with Gallup over Cooper? What would you advise folks that are looking at their lineups this morning and thinking about Cooper?
Oh yeah, I have some Cooper decisions for sure. And the fact that I have guys like Josh Gordon in lineups and he's out, it kind of puts me in situations like, do I start Cooper or Cohen? Tariq Cohen as an example. Someone who is.
Well, now we're slumming.
Yeah. So I mean, is it somebody like that, or do I take Cooper or say Robbie Anderson in that case?
Right.
And then that becomes and I think for me, Anderson is someone that I would probably consider over Cooper. But that's a tough one because, again, the Patriots defense. So I think that Cooper's a guy that I'm going to end up starting in probably most of the formats that I'm in, and some of the players that you mentioned. I mean, I think for me, I would probably consider Cooper over Anderson this week, though that's a difficult one for me. I think I would probably take Robert Woods over Cooper.
I mean, basically anybody with a real pulse this week, you're probably thinking, don't take your chances. Like some of the guys I mentioned, like Ridley, Cooks, Fuller, these you don't even pause, and you're putting Cooper on the bench.
I think that's probably places where I would probably consider those guys over Cooper.
What do you think about Jordan Howard tonight?
Should
we pencil him in for, last week was 13 out of 16 carries. So if the Eagles can get 22 running back carries, should we pencil Howard in for 18 of them tonight? I mean, should we pencil Howard in as that feature back on running downs behind this offensive line?
Yes, without a doubt. Yeah.
And we'll see about Andre Dillard tonight. What, Gene, anything on Jason Peters, by the way, week to week at this point?
Yeah, that's Doug Peterson's way of saying that it's a multiple week injury. Day to day can sometimes mean 1 to 2 weeks in Philadelphia, whereas week to week means definitely not this week, and next week is questionable as well. Peters is another guy that likes to play through injuries if he can get on the field at all. So the fact that they didn't give him much chance suggests that next week is probably questionable too.
But we're not in any kind of like Kyle Long zone with.
I don't think so. I mean, I think that's kind of a specific situation with, hip injury can be something that is just so limiting that, a knee is a little bit different than that. You can brace the knee a little bit differently than what you can do with a hip or otherwise. But no, I don't think that's likely to be the case.
Matt, there's other players in this Philly-Dallas game. It's a great game. I mean, I think if you could just watch one game end to end this week, that would be the one. And thankfully, it's a Sunday night game. From a game script perspective, do you expect this game to be wild and woolly enough to nudge people off the fence, especially if you're making tough quarterback decisions with Wentz or Prescott? Are you nudging people on the fence of saying, get your players in this game in your lineup because it should be wild and woolly and high scoring? Or do you think these teams might actually get into something more like, say, what we expect from the Minnesota-Detroit game, a little more close to the vest?
I think that because of the nature of the injuries, I think also because it is a divisional game, and the fact that there's a little bit, I think Philadelphia is in a situation that's more likely to have a high level of points, that they score a high level of points. Whereas I think with Dallas, I mean, while Gallup does sound like a great play, who else is going to actually be the recipient of a high number of points in that passing game? And I just don't see that really happening. I mean, I think Winton can be pretty decent there. Gallup is fine, but is it going to be Austin or Cooper? Is Cooper really hitting on all cylinders? So I think it's more about, if it's a shootout, it means Cooper's healthy enough to really make this offense go. Otherwise, I think that you're seeing that Philadelphia is the team that you're going to want to insert most of your players.
And Matt, I think in the background here, I know we're spending a lot of time on this game, but it's a good one. Really quickly, though, I think what we're looking at here is the first 3 weeks we thought Kellen Moore is an offensive genius. This is a new age for the Dallas offense. In the last 3 weeks, starting with the Saints game, some might argue that you shouldn't do a parade through the French Quarter with Cowboys flags. Since that Saints game, they've turned back into the Scott Linehan predictable, boring offense. So that's what I'm going to be watching as just a general context for how to project the Cowboys going forward. Because once they weren't facing weak competition, it looked like the boring old Cowboys offense, and you can't run Ezekiel Elliott 20 times into the Eagles defensive line and expect that to work. Let's turn the page, but stay partially in the NFC East, Gene. The Arizona Giants game today, it looks like between David Johnson and Christian Kirk, we're pretty sure we're going to see one, and we're pretty sure we're not going to see the other. Do you think that this is a wise way for the Cardinals to handle the situations with David Johnson and Christian Kirk?
Yeah, for Kirk for sure. Cliff Kingsbury and the Cardinals have been very careful about bringing him back and say they're not going to allow him to return until he can cut at speed and perform all the duties of the position without any difficulty. And as late as Friday, they were saying that he was improving and showing progress, but he wasn't all the way there yet. So although they listed him questionable, there really wasn't much chance of him playing. It's no surprise to essentially hear that he's been ruled out already, even though it's not been formalized on the injury report. David Johnson, the Cardinals running back depth chart is really beat up right now. And there was some discussion about whether or not what their backup plan, and Cliff Kingsbury sort of called it an emergency plan if Johnson wasn't able to go. And they didn't make any roster moves on Saturday to bolster that running back depth chart up at all. So that suggests that the back injury is hopefully a non-issue at this point, and they're happy enough with how he responded to Friday's practice that his ankle is not going to be a limiting condition. Both of those things could crop up at any point during the game, but they must feel comfortable enough with him, maybe not to use him as often as they did last week, although I was pretty surprised that he got as many touches as he did after the discussion about the back injury leading into week 6. But I think it looks like he's going to be used as much as he's able to, and I would say at least 80% of his usual workload, if not a full workload.
So Matt, I think David Johnson, because of the way he's used as a receiver, is just one of those guys this year. If he's active, you play him. But what about Chase Edmonds? I hope that we see Chase Edmonds become really, it's kind of like thinking like a basketball starting 5 coming out of the locker room. Like you think Larry Fitzgerald, well, when he's back, Christian Kirk, David Johnson, like he's one of the main players for this offense. So you treat him that way when you're setting your lineup today as you look at the Giants matchup?
I think that you give him definitely enhanced consideration. And I think a lot of that goes to the fact that that Arizona's offense is basically working around inside receivers and running backs. And that's what you're looking at, because who plays outside? Keyshawn Johnson and
Jameer Byrd
Sheffield and Jameer Byrd.
Yeah.
And then the guys who play on the inside are getting most of the love there. And you can see too that they're using, both backs in the backfield at times, or they're using Johnson split outside, or they're using Edmonds split outside. So this is kind of a, maybe a low rent situation compared to, say, the Broncos or the 49ers, where they're using 2 backs a good deal, but it's one that may continue to grow, especially with the way that Edmonds is playing. I mean, Edmonds is one of those players that you can think of in that Philip Lindsay, Austin Eckler, Brian Westbrook back in the day type of mode, in terms of someone that could lead the backfield in terms of production in any given week, even though right now the current trend would show David Johnson. So I think that you continue to roll with him because he has been one of their most, I think, productive per touch weapons that they've had.
Matt, you gonna get cute with Daniel Jones this week because Evan Ingram and Barkley are back. It's the Arizona matchup. I mean, like Daniel Jones, and if you were looking at, say, Dak Prescott or Wentz in that game we already talked about, are you even pausing to consider that? Are you saying, come on, it's still Daniel Jones in his rookie year?
No, I mean, I think that there's reason, if you have a low end quarterback 1 that you're projecting for, low end quarterback 1 numbers, that you might very well consider him in this case. Now, Patrick Peterson coming back, I mean, could affect that a little bit. I mean, if I have, I think right now as it stands, if you're someone who really needs to make the consideration, then, and you're feeling like that there's a little desperation for you at quarterback, and your team's in a little bit of in a situation where you feel you're kind of more in the standpoint of,
like Christian McCaffrey's on bye. Like usually count on McCaffrey. That might make you more inclined to play a Daniel Jones.
You need to basically you need to stay on pace with what you're doing to get into the playoffs here. I think that playing it safe is Daniel Jones, actually. Whereas I think that Dak Prescott is more variable because of Cooper, at this stage of the game. But then
offense, the boring offense.
Well, yeah, I mean, then again, Philadelphia is a cure-all in terms of their secondary.
Right, the
Their secondary has been awful. So, from that standpoint, you just have to look at it this way. Can you live with the variability of Dak Prescott being a top 3 quarterback this week if you don't start him? Or is it that you need a guy who is going to give you at least, top 10 to top 15 production at the position, and that's good enough for you? and that's
And,
Jones.
and really quick on that same game, Calbuto asks, and this is going to require a little input from you first, Gene. Should I play Edelman tomorrow or Tate today? So real quickly, Gene, is a spoiler. I mean, I was going to get to that game a little bit later, but just real quickly on Edelman. We've learned over the years. I don't want to steal your thunder here. Like, there's a lot of Bill Belichick injury designations that we just ignore. Is Edelman's this week one of them?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I don't average double-digit targets even over the time period at which the chest injury has been a concern. Continues to play 90% of the snaps. Didn't see or hear anything during last week's game or this week's practice participation to make me feel different.
So Edelman versus Tate, and that might not be difficult, Matt, but also give us your thoughts on Tate this week after he actually came through against the Patriots, but now he has to compete with Ingram and Barkley. But again, against Arizona, and you mentioned Patrick Peterson. I can't imagine Patrick Peterson is going to follow Golden Tate into the slot. What do we think about Tate today?
No, I mean, I think Tate has a good shot of being a decent player, and I would probably like him more than a guy like Darius Slayton, who will probably get followed a little bit by Patrick Peterson. Even though, I don't think they're going to put one guy on any of these receivers, but that being said, I think Tate is probably a little bit more reliable of a guy and will quickly establish himself as that guy in that lineup.
All right, turning the page. Well, actually, I'm going to use the Daniel Jones data point as a transition to this one, Matt. I'm going to ask you first. I'm going to put your feet to the fire and say, if you had to choose between Daniel Jones and Aaron Rodgers today, who would you put in your lineup?
Oh, I'm putting in Aaron Rodgers, and I think the reason being is that this offense, I think, is slowly starting to come to life a little bit, even without the receivers that we have.
That's
going
the question.
on.
Yeah, who is he going to throw to today, Gene?
I think
we're coming on with that in a second. Go ahead.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Alan Lazard is a viable answer, and I think also that this is a game that is probably going to be. There's a very distinct possibility that Oakland jumps ahead in this game and maintains a lead that forces Aaron Rodgers to just continue throwing the ball, and this could be a garbage time game where the Green Bay Packers offense doesn't look great, but Aaron Rodgers at the end of the day has strong numbers.
Yeah, I'm rooting for Oakland. I find myself really wanting Oakland to continue to do well, but that's as an aside. Also, maybe some football gods rebalancing what happened on Monday night. How does Green Bay respond Monday night? It was a short week of prep, Gene. To the best of your abilities, and you have immense abilities, but this is a very difficult situation. Who is Aaron Rodgers going to throw the ball to today?
Aaron Jones. No. So I think Devontae Adams is not going to play. Jimmy Graham is. That much we know. I think Marquez Valdez-Scantling probably has a better chance to play than Geronimo Allison, but I'm intrigued by the late week upgrade from doubtful to questionable. And then Adam Schefter saying overnight that Allison was going to be evaluated pregame. And that doesn't really make a lot of sense for a concussion recovery. It sort of dismissed the chest injury as a non-issue after it was reported to not be as nearly concerning as the concussion was earlier in the week. So you wonder if those reports were based on, Allison's what appeared to be a head injury that could be concerning for the Packers, and we know they have a conservative medical staff. Maybe he improved a lot more quickly than expected from a concussion return to play symptom checklist as the week went along, and they didn't have to consider the chest injury a big deal because they expected him to be back in 2 weeks instead of 1. So maybe he's already been cleared from a concussion perspective on Saturday, and the upgrade from doubtful to questionable was an instance where he's already seen the independent neurologist, and that injury is not an issue. I don't know that that's the case. I still feel like the concussion is the primary concern here. And now the Packers are worried about whether or not he's fit enough from a chest perspective to play. I don't know. I still feel like that's a little bit of a stretch. It's unusual for a team like the Packers to allow this to go all the way up to game day as far as concussion return to play protocol. Maybe there was an instance in which he just could not get in to see the independent neurologist until Sunday morning, but this is a noon time local game. Allowing this to go all the way up to game time is questionable to me. So I'm still nervous about Allison. I still think he's very questionable to play. But this, since Thursday, it's been an open question about whether or not they'll be able to get him back. Valdez-Scantling had a high ankle sprain. He admitted, as we'll often see. Sometimes the players don't say this, but this is what we talk about. that the adrenaline allows them to play through before the swelling and the stiffness sets in the following day. And being that this was a Monday night game and he had one less day to recover, puts him questionable as well. And I think really had these guys been the only injury on the team, I think and again, I don't mean to imply there's any shenanigans going on with the concussion return here or there. If Valdez-Scantling was the only injury in that wide receiver group, I think they'd probably hold him out, right, and allow him to get fully recovered, because if he plays today, he's not going to be at full strength. Allison's a little bit of a different issue. If he's cleared to play today and he is active, then you would assume he's capable and comfortable taking a full workload. And then we'll see. I think both of these players are likely to return the following week if they don't play this week. They've got Jake Kumerow. They've got Alan Lazard, who proved himself in Aaron Rodgers' eyes last week. So they've got a little bit of a buffer there. And Robert Tonyan is out as well. So, I'm joking a little bit by saying Aaron Jones, but I think the running backs are probably going to be a much higher part of the passing game, even than they might otherwise have been this week.
So, Matt, if you're putting together a DFS lineup and we're following the idea that, hey, it could be a big Aaron Rodgers day anyway, who would you try to stack with him? Who do you expect to be atop the stat line for his targets?
Well, I think that, if I was listening well enough, I would say probably Jimmy Graham. I would say probably Allison is someone that I would continue to consider in that regard. Yes, Aaron Jones, I think, as Gene joked and half joked, is probably very much correct in terms of both he and Jamal Williams, I think, are guys that are going to get touches, and they're both going to get target opportunities. Whitewater Jesus is always probably going to be a nice little bet there. And of course, Lazard. I think Lazard is probably the prime candidate here.
Yeah, I was going to say Lazard is the fun one. And it might, if Allison and or Valdez-Scantling are active, it might scare people off of Lazard. But if we know Aaron Rodgers, whatever the game plan is, whatever the called plays are, if he sees something that's working, then he's going to go for it. And Aaron Rodgers is the perfect quarterback for someone like the Lazard King. So that's and I'm glad you brought up Jamal Williams. I think that now, on the other hand, I think that if Matt LaFleur is saying, this is what we're going to do today, Aaron, it's 35 or 40 touches between those two running backs. And a lot of the passing game going through them, because that's been a pretty solid way for them to move the ball, maybe matriculating the ball down the field instead of Rodgers hanging out back there and trying to hit someone streaking down the field. A game that is going to feature a lot of players streaking down the field, that Rams-Atlanta game. Gene, real briefly, because I don't think there's a lot to flesh out here. And in some ways, we circle back to our preseason takes on Todd Gurley. But should we be considering the Todd Gurley saga of last year, the Todd Gurley saga of the last 2 weeks when we are setting our lineups? Or should we just look at the name Todd Gurley, think about it, Atlanta, put him in your lineup?
I think we have to consider it a little bit because the Rams are. I think one of the reasons the Rams didn't really allow Gurley to do much in practice last week is they didn't want to put any stress on that knee. As far as this week goes, I think the full week of practice means that quad muscle is again firing as it's supposed to, that they don't have any ongoing concerns about his knee. But I don't know that it necessarily means that we see 93% of the snaps as we did in week 5, or all of the targets that he got in the previous week. I think that there's a good chance that we'll see a little bit more of Darrell Henderson with Malcolm Brown out than we might have otherwise had Gurley been healthy enough to play last week. Now, some of that may depend on how the game script goes and how Gurley feels through the first couple of series. And if he feels fine, they've shown that if he's okay this year over the last 2 weeks that he played, that they will increase his workload. But I think I'd work under the assumption that he's going to play. He's going to see much of the carries between the tackles. He's going to see the bulk of the goal line work. But I don't know that we're going to see the same number of targets. Well, we wouldn't have anyway. What did he get? 14 targets in week 4 or something like that. I don't think we're going to see that anyhow. But I think the target projection for him on passing downs probably ought to be considered a little bit less than usual.
So, other one we have to look at here real quickly. And again, I don't expect there's a lot out here. Any reason to think the Jalen Ramsey we see today will be different than Jalen Ramsey we saw like a month ago in Jacksonville?
No, I there probably was something to the back there. And again, I think in hindsight, we sort of hinted at this, but his going to the specialist was to make absolutely sure that if he did choose to come back and play, that he wasn't likely to put himself in harm's way enough to make the possibility of a trade less likely. So back to a full practice, there wasn't much of a concern. He worked his way out of Jacksonville. He's excited to be in Los Angeles. So no, I think Ramsey's going to be full strength.
So Matt, you've been watching, and again, we should give you hazard pay for watching the Falcons every week. Although it gives us the doomsday clock for Dan Quinn, you can calibrate it down to the second. Certainly, things have not gone as planned on the offensive line for Atlanta this year. Now, Clay Matthews is out this week. That's the only little bit of good news that you could say, a little bit of relief for Atlanta. The other thing that they didn't plan on, of course, was facing Jalen Ramsey. Now, we've seen this year, Matt, Ryan's going to get 300 yards. He's going to throw at least one touchdown, maybe multiple touchdowns. In this game, you'd certainly pencil in for multiple touchdowns because it's game script and other things. But we've also seen that you can look at the stat lines and you can almost tell what kind of day it has been for him in terms of pressure, in terms of time to throw, by whether it's an Austin Hooper, Mohamed Sanu day, or whether it's a Julio Jones, Calvin Ridley day. And now we complicate this by adding Jalen Ramsey to this picture. So yeah, how would you, it's like almost like betting on a roulette wheel, right? I mean, you have some chips to put down. How are you distributing your chips in the Atlanta passing game today?
You always bet Hooper. I think that's the point with this offense. You always bet him. It's just a matter of whether it's going to be a 100-yard day and a touchdown, or whether it's going to be more in the range of 50 to 75 yards and a number of small, short catches over the middle type of thing. And I think that's so Hooper's a guy that you're going to play regardless. Do you really bench Julio Jones? I think not. So, it doesn't matter whether it's Ramsey or not. I mean, he's a must-start player. I think it really comes down to Ridley or Sanu at this point. And I think Sanu has been the more reliable player at this stage. I mean, he's the guy that's off-targeted on third down. Ridley's a guy that can explode for you in any given situation. And certainly the Rams, to me, if it comes down to Ridley or Sanu for you, then I mean, you're probably, I think Sanu's the safer player, but Ridley's a guy, why not both? I mean, because Ridley's a guy that also can go off and have a big day for you. And the Rams, yes, their secondary got better on paper, but they haven't really performed together yet. You're going to see some missed assignments. I think that's going to happen. So it's just a matter of, how much have you trusted Ridley lately? If you haven't trusted him lately, you're going to continue to go with Sanu. If you have continued to trust him and you feel like he's going to start catching passes that he's dropped, or he's going to start getting targets that he hasn't, then you roll with him. But he's the most expendable of those choices.
Gene, I'm trying to come up with some kind of joke about Mitchell Trubisky's shoulder injury, kind of like in those old cartoons where someone would get hit on the head and then they would think they were an Italian race car driver. I think that happened to Fred Flintstone once. Like, could something about this injury have made Mitchell Trubisky forget who he was and make him a new man? But should we? Not that there was much there to begin with, but will his ability to pass be limited in his return this week?
I don't think so. He'll have had enough time to adjust to how his body feels with the harness on that other shoulder. It really shouldn't limit how he throws the ball. I think the Bears are probably a little bit less likely to put him in situations where they've got a run pass option or a read option run play where he's expected to run the ball. Not that he won't scramble, but I don't expect him to put himself at any risk of taking a hit in an unusual way on that shoulder side. But now I think the passing game is not likely to change much.
While we're on the Chicago-New Orleans game, Gene, chances we see Alvin Kamara next week?
At 50-50, Ian Rappaport seemed to suggest that the high ankle injury was the more concerning thing this morning when he reported that they were optimistic that he'd be back the following week. Again, we got a bye week coming up for New Orleans soon enough. So rather than letting a high ankle injury, if that's really what the primary issue is, and it's not the MCL sprain that looked like he sustained last week, if it's the high ankle that's the concern, giving him an extra week with all of the explosiveness and elusiveness that he has to limit the risk of re-injury is pretty important. If the Saints continue to win without Drew Brees and now without Alvin Kamara, he may well be allowed to take an extra week to recover. So we'll call him questionable and see how Wednesday practice goes.
More or less of a chance that we see Jared Cook next week against
I
Arizona.
still don't know what's going on with Jared Cook. Today, at some point, I'm going to watch last week's game carefully and see if there's anything subtle that can be picked up to decide whether or not this is an ankle injury of the type that might linger a little bit longer. But for the same reason, you got a player that hasn't returned to practice at all. That usually portends a multiple week absence. Players do whatever they can to not miss a game. Once they miss one, it makes a lot more sense to allow them to fully recover. So you got to consider him questionable for next week too.
And of course, Matt, with Jared Cook out this week, Danger Dan Arnold, Wisconsin Platteville. We're getting all the Wisconsin satellite universities mentioned today, but in part because it was a sad day in Wisconsin. A happy day for Illinois. Matt, have you seen Lovie Smith's beard, by the way?
No, I haven't.
It's something to behold. Folks, look it up. Lovie Smith. And it was great to see Lovie. I think Lovie Smith's one of those people that seems like one of the good guys in football, regardless of how he did as a coach. But instead of basking in that was a place to be yesterday in the college football world. Let's go up to Soldier Field, Matt. And first, starting with Trubisky. This is terrible because I feel like Allen Robinson is playing as well as Allen Robinson has played when we watch him every week. But it's Mitchell Trubisky. It's New Orleans. It's Marshawn Lattimore. And we see this go both ways, right? Because sometimes I'll bench a player that I know is a good player playing well, and he'll play well and find a way to overcome his circumstances. And I'll say, why did I bench him? But then sometimes I'll play that player and I'll say, why did I think he could overcome these circumstances? It's too much for anybody to overcome. Trubisky plus Lattimore, does that equal the bench for Allen Robinson this week?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think that he's going to try and target him. I mean, I don't think it's going to, be a situation where he shies away as much as you would think. I mean, I think that this is a deal where I think to begin the season, I mean, you might have wondered whether, Jair Alexander seemed like is a really good press player. And you would think, well, maybe we shouldn't start him against Green Bay. We had 13 targets, 7 catches for 102 yards. I mean, so against Denver, I mean, different story, 4 for 41, but still 7 targets. He's consistently getting the targets that you would expect from a number one receiver. And again, we talk about the whole thing about volume being the predicator for success. And I don't think that volume is going to go away.
A larger question about Chicago, Matt, because we've talked a lot, you and I talked at length about this week on the couch about Sean McVay and what's happened from 2018 to 2019. I know we've briefly touched on Matt Nagy, but I feel like McVay has gotten a lot of attention for not evolving or continuing to stay a step ahead of the competition. Matt Nagy, I don't know if enough attention has been put on him for not doing that, but they had a bye week. And you might argue that this week, Trey Burton is as healthy as he's been all year. Taylor Gabriel's out of concussion protocol now. They have a week to reassess priorities. And the person that this really intersects with from a fantasy standpoint is David Montgomery. And this is a tough draw this week. The Saints defense is surging. But give me your overall diagnosis. This was an exciting offense at times last year for fantasy football. It has been nothing remotely like that this year. Do you think that can change before the end of the year? Do you think folks that drafted David Montgomery, because I think those two things are tied together, can get some kind of return, or is this going to be that most frustrating fantasy situation where you want to keep starting a player and he keeps underperforming and you keep talking yourself into it and he keeps underperforming?
Yeah, for Montgomery specifically, I'd give up on him in terms of unless you just have a deep roster and you have the luxury of being able to hold on to him and see if some sort of clear pattern emerges. But I think what's most likely to happen is that the passing game will figure out a way to get it together. But really, what's kind of funny here is that while everyone's pointing their finger at the Los Angeles Rams and Jared Goff, Mitchell Trubisky is like sneaking out the back door,
right?
And the media hasn't seen it yet. It's like, or at least the media in sunglasses with white sticks with red ends to it, basically commenting about the situation, because really everything they're projecting on the Rams and their situation with McVay, Goff is probably more in line for Trubisky. I mean, I don't even want to get into it to that degree, but to me, it's, you're going to be looking at more of a situation where the Bears coaching staff is going to be able to have to figure out ways to manufacture offense through Trubisky. And I think that the whole cartoon of Trubisky wearing a harness, but being a baby in a harness attached to his head coach is probably much more true than the actual puppet strings on golf. So, we'll see if we can get that narrative rolling and let the chum the waters with that for the media sharks to jump in and have their frenzy.
I was picturing the baby in The Hangover with the sunglasses.
Pretty much,
it's sneaking out the back door. What's going to be interesting to watch this is more of a Thursday night kind of thing. Like, are the Bears honest with themselves before Trubisky's rookie contract is over? And again, Nick Foles, it's going to be a transition. If I have one more thing to talk about for this game, but Nick Foles is going to be healthy soon, and he's going to be out there. And of course, Matt Nagy knows him. But
have the Bears ever been honest about themselves with a quarterback since Sid Luckman?
Exactly.
I mean, seriously. I mean, no, they're not. They're a hook, line, and sinker. They're still at the apex of their denial about him, just as the Browns fans are entering the apex of their denial about Baker Mayfield, who may steer his way out of it.
So, Matt, what kind of Josh Jacobs impression can Latavius Murray do today with Alvin Kamara? What's your level of confidence if you're looking at Latavius Murray? And I mean, I can toss some names out. We don't have to go through them all one by one, but if you're weighing Latavius Murray against Matt Breida, or Latavius Murray against Todd Gurley, we talked about, or Latavius Murray against Devontae Freeman, say in a PPR league because he was getting all of that work in the passing game. What's your confidence level on Latavius Murray and his big start today?
More than Devonta Freeman, but less than the other two guys you mentioned. It's, I guess, kind of more like, what's that guy Rob Riggle on Fox who does the impressions? He's no
Frank Caliendo.
He's not going to be doing it for a living, in terms of anywhere outside of this whole football thing. But yeah, it'll work all right.
I mentioned Nick Foles. Let's turn the page to the Jags. Gene, D.D. Westbrook, because the Bengals are without both of their starting corners. It was really exciting to consider playing D.D. Westbrook, but then all this shoulder stuff cropped up. Have we gotten enough reassurance to plug him back into our lineups?
I think so. There's still some indication that the Jaguars want to see how he looks in pregame warmups before clearing him. I'm still of the mind that this was probably a little bit more maintenance than true concern about whether or not he'd be able to finish the game. But the lack of a full practice on Friday and the fact that there's still some concern for pregame warmups has to give you a little bit of a pause that you at least need to make sure that he's active and there aren't anything that ends up being reported here in this next hour or so that sounds concerning. But I think we should be okay here.
Matt, you drafted Tyler Boyd to play Tyler Boyd, but are we saying no for the time being because of how the Bengals offense is bogging down?
I mean, looking at Tyler Boyd and you just think about, what he has to offer in terms of targets recently. I mean, Boyd is a guy that when we look at his, and you look at kind of like his target history, it's still at worst 6 targets, and that was in week 4. And yes, he had a 3-target, 10-yard game against the Ravens and a 3-target, 33-catch game against Pittsburgh. But, he's also had 2 10-catch games and an 8-catch game. I think you continue to roll with Boyd. I think that you give him another opportunity before you completely shut him down.
What about Joe Mixon?
I mean, Joe Mixon is – these days, in terms of what we're looking at with the running back picture, I mean, I don't see how you bench him unless you just happen to be
Joe
one
Mixon
of those
or
people.
Latavius Murray. Mixon or Murray.
I think Murray is probably I would say I'd still go with Mixon. I just don't. I don't trust any running back against this Bears defense. Even though Jacobs had a really good day, I just don't know if. I look at this and I know that the Saints have a pretty darn good offensive line, but I think they're going to shut that down and try and make Bridgewater beat them. I still think that that's going to be the mode here. So I would still probably consider Mixon above Murray.
Mixon or Jordan Howard?
I'm going to go with Jordan Howard in this case, just because I think there's more of a safer floor. But I think most people will probably continue to disagree with me, but they've disagreed with me about Jordan Howard from the get-go. So, if you're still in that mode, then, bless you.
We have to come up with a name for the advocacy group that you lead, Matt, for the running backs. I don't know exactly how to capture the quality of the, I don't want to say lunch pail guys because that's kind of a cliche, but we'll work on that. We'll talk about that after the show.
Slow guys can do slow guys can do work running backs.
Slow running backs matter.
Slow running backs matter. Yes.
There you go.
Or their athleticism is in their brain as opposed to not having a brain, but for the game, but lots
and
of
they're tough
ability.
and tough.
Yeah.
They're smart and tough, even though they might be slow. Gene, Marquise Brown, Hollywood is not slow, but it looks like he's not going to play. And what can we deduce? I ask you these questions from time to time, Gene, of reverse engineering the comments versus the actual verifiable, whether a player's practicing or playing or not. If we're looking at Marquise Brown going forward, so we expect him now that he's been out for 2 weeks. Does that mean we might as well put an X through week 8 also?
No, probably not. I think they've got a bye next week, don't they?
Yeah. Oh, you're right. So maybe I'm sorry. You are putting an X.
Probably part of the calculus that's going into this is they said earlier in the week, Harbaugh did that if he didn't practice, he wasn't going to play. They listed him questionable, but he's not going to play. And I think, maybe had they not had this bye week, looking at them in the face and saying, we're probably going to get him back in full strength in week 9, that maybe there was a closer chance for him playing. But yeah, I would be surprised if he wasn't able to go against New England.
Matt, on this is a fun game, by the way, one of the fun afternoon games. It's almost like Chicago, New Orleans is going to be the defensive game that we would have thought we got 5 years ago between Baltimore and Seattle. But Baltimore and Seattle, hey, Lamar Jackson versus Russell Wilson, that's must-see TV. But outside of Mark Andrews and Tyler Lockett, and of course Mark Ingram and Chris Carson, is there anybody liking this game? You want to dabble in some? I know a lot of people are wanting to push DK Metcalf in with Will Dissly out and some red zone targets freed up. Any number of players we could pick out from Baltimore's set of receivers, or are we sticking basically with the top running backs, the top targets, Andrews being a tight end, and the quarterbacks in this one?
I definitely would start DK Metcalf, and I am in some leagues. I would consider Jerron Brown. I think that he's a worthwhile consideration. In terms of the Baltimore side of the field, I think that's going to be a little bit more difficult because you'd like to say Miles Boykin, but he's just not getting targets. And I think that they're using him more as an outside receiver in a way that it's he's going to get that vertical consideration once or twice a game, and he might hit big on it, but it's a real boom bust type of situation. So you're probably looking at more, again, Boyle Hurst type of situation in terms of the tight ends that are available outside of Andrews. And Willie Snead, I think, is a decent play. Willie Snead's a guy that you're going to get a high floor from him relative to other receivers. He's kind of in that mode of Randall Cobb, which is basically you're going to get targets. You might get lucky and get a red zone target where he scores. And if it's a garbage time situation, he might even get, an enhanced number of targets enough that he even gets relevant fantasy yardage in addition to those. But he's more of a high floor PPR play with a low ceiling.
Gene, did the Titans give Delaney Walker off to have his head checked after he said Ryan Tannehill was an elite quarterback?
No.
Is he going to play?
I think he's going to play. It was a little bit odd for him to get the day off on Friday rather than Wednesday. He'd been kind of taking Wednesdays and Thursdays off from a veteran perspective this week, but and more for knee issues than ankle issues. But the ankle was sort of the problem last year as well. I think he was listed with a knee earlier this year. But yeah, I don't think there's much concern. Tron Davenport, who follows the Titans very closely, didn't have any concern that he wasn't going to be able to play. That was really the only local report that I saw, and there's not been any indication he won't. So I think probably just a veteran day on Friday instead of earlier in the week, and he's good to go.
Kind of a get voted off the island game between the Chargers and the Titans this week. Like whoever loses this game should really feel like it's time to start looking ahead to 2020. So in this game, the Pittsburgh Steelers defense is back, and we saw Austin Eckler and Melvin Gordon. You put them into your lineups, and the Steelers defense was a wood chipper and just turn them into little confetti nothing for your lineup. The opposite of confetti, really. Titans run defense is pretty tough too, but is this going to be a bounce back game for Eckler and or Gordon, or are you looking at the indicators coming in here and looking elsewhere for your running backs this week?
I think you just hold your nose and start either one of those guys and be okay and just deal with it. Because I mean, I think that the Chargers are the one about to go swirling down the drain more than I think the Titans. I think the Titans will, in an odd way, hang in there, even though the Titans have the worst of the two quarterbacks. And yeah, Delaney Walker's just being smart. He's trying to lobby for targets. And I do have a name for running backs. It's the tortoise over the hare running.
There you
back.
go. I like
there we
it.
Go.
I like it.
There we go.
We're gonna run with this, but not too fast. But we will win the race. Any Titans? You mentioned Tannehill. Any Titans? You didn't get cute with a Corey Davis or an Adam Humphries. Ryan Tannehill checking down a lot. You're going to dabble in the Titans passing game today with Tannehill there?
I mean, I would probably dabble with Davis. I would probably dabble with Delaney Walker. I think it's smart that he did what he did. So I think there's going to be a little bit of, Walker and Davis. And then I think everybody else, I'd probably wouldn't. I would just wait and see at this stage, unless you're just truly desperate. And if you're, if you're that desperate that you're considering a player, Humphries is probably going to be your guy to look at. But the problem with that is the risk is, what if AJ Brown turns into, a tank-sized Jarvis Landry for this team? And I think that there's a real chance that happens because, Adam Humphries, he gets the ball and he gets maybe 3 to 5 yards, and that's sweet. And then AJ Brown gets the ball and bounces off 3 to 5 guys and gets a lot more. And I think that's kind of what you're facing in terms of possibilities there.
Let me turn the page. We got just a couple of games we haven't touched on in this one. One of them we have already touched on, Gene, but since we have just a few minutes left, I want to get a chance to hear what you have to say about the situation with Kelechi Osemele and the Jets. And it sounds like they want him to play. He wants to have surgery. I know Amy Trask. Amy's fantastic. What a credit to the football world and to football Twitter, and always an enjoyable part of any conversation. She's been outspoken about this. Yeah, it's so it's the pleasantness that we need in this world today. But this isn't a pleasant subject. I'm curious what you think as you watch these things play out. I know we saw Cordy Glenn fined by the team about the severity of his concussion. What do you're keeping up with this stuff as much as anybody out there, but what do you think? Because you also are a man of high ethics and values and morals, as you see how teams are handling these situations.
I don't think we have all the information. And that's going to be important in a situation like this. I also think this probably happens more than we realize, where there may be a disagreement from a player. And this goes in both directions. A player thinks he's healthy enough to play and the team may not clear him. But I would imagine, just because we saw 2 high-profile offensive line cases this week, and this one in particular, where there were some allegations that the Jets may not have been sharing the right imaging views and other things as he continued to get other opinions. But I think I saw one report that maybe hinted that what could be going on is that Osemele has an injury that he could play through and just isn't comfortable playing through. And at the time that they signed him, maybe it wasn't even a pre-existing condition, and they didn't think it was going to be this much of an issue. And the team is planning on having a player available like that. So I think eventually we'll get a little bit more of the details and it'll make a little bit more sense. As it stands now, you'd have a hard time thinking that a player with a documented injury who says he's not healthy enough to play, and there's some concern about whether or not he may need surgery, it's a player that probably can't be fined successfully. Hopefully he recovers well enough to play this year and doesn't need surgery until after the season, but it's kind of a week-to-week process with him. And again, I'm waiting for a little bit more information before commenting too much more definitively than that.
Okay, in our last few minutes, a little bit more fun too, because I came in with the game show music. I think it was actually Herb Alpert. I don't remember if that was the Daily. Was it on the Dating Game maybe, or the Newlywed Game? I don't remember.
Yep,
it was the Dating Game. There's a lot of good dating game clips out there. We can think of this kind of a dating game for the last spot on our deep dynasty roster, and it's kind of like Stump the RSP. Okay, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, man. It's just be pure fun. Stump the RSP. What do we have on Jason Moore from Findlay?
Not a thing.
coming up for the Chargers. I know that I don't think he timed out well. And what do we have on Craig Reynolds called up by Washington? I wish it could have been Bryce Love from Kutztown today.
Yeah, not a thing on that one either. You've stumped them twice. There you go.
So we'll see. But it looks like with the numerous injuries,
so rude.
I didn't tell. Well, I didn't. I'm asking you because I was looking at my Deep Dynasty roster this morning, and I'm thinking, who's actually like on a roster now?
The best thing I can tell you, and it's not even a very good one, is I think Ted Bundy was on one of those dating show games.
Yeah.
So
there's a lot.
There you go.
That's
what happens when you ask me questions about players I don't have anything on.
I hope that's not like
start bringing up serial killers or something. I don't know.
We found a good series. BuzzFeed did it, and the two dudes that do it are okay, but it's on unsolved cases, and there's a lot of stuff like that out there. Although obviously the Ted Bundy one was solved. I watched the Ted Bundy stuff on Netflix when they did the Ted Bundy tapes. It was kind of disappointing, actually. Disappointing because it was just another dude who was angry at women because they didn't do whatever he wanted. Anyway, I'm really going off the rails here. So you bring up serial killers, and now this is a much more fascinating topic than is Xavier Howard going to play today, Gene?
Yeah, let's stick with that. I think Howard's going to play. Carry on with the serial killer conversation.
So is that any reason we should not treat John Brown other than Xavier Howard playing the way we normally would after he popped up on the injury report briefly this week, Gene?
No, I think I pretty much dismissed him from my level of concern after Friday, and I'm going to assume that's because he came back to a full practice. Yeah, both him and Brown and Foster, who are dealing with some measure of groin injuries, are back. We have had concern, not to belabor this point, but we've had concern about Brown in the past with his sickle cell trait and how quickly he recovers from muscle injuries, but that has not been a concern over the last couple of years, and the full practice and the fact that Buffalo, who will sometimes list their players as questionable, took him off the injury report altogether is a good sign. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about him at all.
And as we have like a minute or two before sign off, Matt, I'm not even looking at this from a fantasy perspective. I just want to get your idea on two really intriguing, again, the divisional matchups. And we're not quite yet. I feel like week 9 or week 10 is when the gear shift happens and you really feel the intensity start to ramp up in some of these games as teams feel that life or death starting to loom over them. But I still think Philly and Dallas has that already. And I don't think it's life or death for Houston and Indy. I don't think it's life or death for Minnesota, Detroit, but these are obviously important games, and they're games that have a wide range of how they can play out. So when you look in the crystal ball, if you even bother doing that, because I know you may say crystal balls, that's for people like you, not me. I'm chalkboards, that's what's for me, and huddle, things like that. Houston and Indy, because last time we saw Indy, we saw a team that could throttle the life out of an offensive game and turn it into a low-scoring game, which sure seems like that would be the plan when you're facing Deshaun Watson, and we saw Deshaun Watson go into KC and do whatever he wanted, basically. What kind of game do you see transpiring in Lucas Oil? I think the roof's open today.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a type of game where it's probably going to be under 45 points. So it's not going to be like a low scoring game, but it's going to be one where, you could probably see it being something like 13-7 in the first half. And then, they start to figure some things out from there. And it turns into like a 24-21 game at most, and so I do see an emphasis on the running game for the Colts in this particular scenario. I think that the short passing that we saw, against the Chiefs will probably continue to some degree, though I don't think the Colts are gonna get fooled the way the Chiefs were with this whole little RPO package that went to Daniel Fells. So to Fells, I think Fells will continue to get targeted, but just not in the way that they used him last week with such ease. So yeah, I mean, I think that this is a game that you probably feel still, very good about. Hopkins, you're still going to go for Fuller, even though Fuller dropped 3 touchdowns essentially last week, and you're going to kind of still roll with him. The whole thing, I guess, with Stills or QT is kind of a question mark to a degree. But if you're thinking about that, you're also probably thinking about some of the other also rans that we looked at that you probably wouldn't want to think about starting.
Stills off their injury report, right, Gene? So we should expect no restrictions.
Yes, yeah, that's correct. And the Texans, through the local writers, have said that he's going to play.
Yeah, but it must have been a fun night to be in Houston last night, by the way. the Yankee Elimination Day holiday. We can all observe it now. And it's Dante Pettis breakout day, Matt. Is it with a lowercase b or an uppercase b against Washington?
I think it's still going to be a lowercase b, but only because they're going to have success running on Washington. And I think that they're going to, Kittle's still going to be a big name, and that it just means that, Pettis might get 5 catches for 80 yards, in today. And that would be about it. Something in that type of range of outcome.
Folks, we always appreciate you joining us. As always, the chat room was fun and giving us a lot of I appreciate the people let us know what's on their mind with some of the questions that we get too. We try to cover everything we can. Also keep it interesting and entertaining, and always enjoying each other's company and enjoying your company here. And as the season marches on, folks, week 7, the visual halfway point of the fantasy football regular season, but we're happy to go all the way to the very end, the bitter end.
Sometimes like the tortoise.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to do this. The tortoise running backs, we've crystallized this, and hopefully we'll see the tortoise tonight and Frank Gore, another one today against Miami. So, folks, thank you so much for joining us as always. You make it easy to do this as well as we can for you because you're so very classy.